I never thought my life would come to this. Sleeping in the back seat of my beat-up Honda Civic while my stepmother and her kids lived in luxury with the money my father had left for me. Hi everyone, before I begin, let me ask, where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments, I'd love to know. My name is Maya, and at 26 I was a graduate student living a secret life. For 4 months, my home was my old Honda Civic parked in quiet corners of Denver. I went to classes during the day, worked 2 jobs, and studied in the library until it closed. No one knew that when the night came, I had nowhere to go but the back seat of my car. The college fund my dad had worked so hard to leave me was gone. My stepmother and her children lived in comfort, while I was left to scrape by. Everything changed when my Uncle James saw me working at the diner. I was thin, tired, and worn out, and he barely recognized me. His shock and concern broke through the wall I had built to keep myself strong. I told him everything, and from that day forward, things began to shift. But before I explain how, I need to tell you how I got here. My childhood was bright. I grew up in a suburb of Denver with my parents, Daniel and Sophia. My dad built a logistics company from nothing, and my mom was the center of our little family. Sundays were filled with pancake breakfasts and long hikes. My Uncle James was always around, generous and fun, and he spoiled me like I was his own daughter. Life felt secure, safe, and happy. That changed when I was 11. My mom was diagnosed with cancer. The sickness came fast, swallowing our savings and leaving us drained in every way. Within 8 months, she was gone. My dad and I clung to each other, carrying our grief while trying to move forward. We managed, even when it hurt. 2 years later, my dad met Victoria. She was beautiful and charming, with 2 children of her own, Logan, who shined in sports, and Isabella, the perfect student. Their relationship moved quickly, and soon we were a blended family. At first, I thought maybe this could work. But it didn't take long to see the truth. When my dad was around, Victoria was kind. When he wasn't, her sweetness vanished. My home no longer felt like mine. My bedroom was taken and turned into a shared space with Isabella. Photos of my mom disappeared from the walls. The life I had known began to fade, and I felt like a stranger inside my own house. My dad didn't see it, or maybe he didn't want to. I stayed quiet, hoping things would get better, but deep down, I knew they wouldn't. This was the beginning of the slow unraveling of everything my father had built and everything my mother had left me with. It was the first step on the road that would end with me, years later, hungry, tired, and hiding in the shadows of a parking lot, trying to survive out of my car. After my mother's passing, my father threw himself into his company, working harder than ever. For a while, things looked steady, but then cracks began to show. Contracts fell through, debts piled up, and for the first time, his empire looked shaky. Victoria seized the moment. She stood by his side in meetings, corrected him in conversations, and painted herself as the person keeping everything afloat. Slowly, she became his shadow, his partner, the one he leaned on. I could see the change. He was slipping further from me and closer to her. Then came the phone call that shattered everything. A late-night drive ended in a crash, and my father never made it home. I can still remember the ringing in my ears when they told me. He was gone, just like that. The reading of the will should have been a moment of comfort, a reminder that he thought of my future. Instead, it turned into the cruelest twist. My father had left me a significant education fund and inheritance, but it came with a condition. Victoria would be the trustee until I turned 25. The house, the company, everything else was placed in her hands. I sat there, stunned, while she wore a look that was equal parts triumph and grief. From that day, the mask she wore around others was gone. Her patience with me vanished. I was moved into a storage room, boxes stacked higher than the bed I slept on. Whenever bills arrived or I asked for something as small as notebooks, she sighed loudly and reminded me that I was a financial burden. "Your father's poor decisions left us with nothing," she'd say, even as I watched Logan drive off in a shiny new sports car and Isabella show off new clothes. I learned quickly that asking was pointless. The money my father left me was meant for my education, but gaining access to it was like crawling through a maze built to frustrate me. Victoria demanded endless forms, approvals, and signatures. Every request came back stamped with excuses. Dorm fees? Unnecessary. A meal plan? Wasteful. Even basic things like textbooks turned into long battles, her favorite line being, "Don't expect me to clean up after your father's mess." I stopped asking for extras and narrowed my focus to one thing: getting into college and getting out of her house. When the acceptance letter from the University of Colorado came, it felt like freedom folded into an envelope. That letter was proof that my hard work hadn't been wasted, and it became the one thing she couldn't take away from me. Still, the victory was bitter. What should have been an exciting start to adulthood was clouded by her control. Every step toward independence meant another roadblock. I could see clearly now, my future, the life my father wanted me to have, was in her grip. She had no intention of making it easy. So I learned patience. I told myself I just needed to endure until the day came when her power over me would expire. But even then, deep down, I worried. When that day finally arrived, would there be anything left for me at all? College became both my escape and my prison. To stay there, I buried myself in work, part-time shifts, late nights, and student loans stacked higher than I wanted to think about. Living on campus gave me a small bubble of independence, but it wasn't easy. Every expense had to be counted twice, every meal stretched as far as possible. Still, compared to life under Victoria's roof, even the exhaustion felt like freedom. After finishing my second year, I had to go back home for the summer. The moment I walked through the front door, it was clear that even the little corner of the house I had once called mine no longer existed. My room, the one place that had held memories of my childhood, was gone. In its place stood a home theater, plush chairs, a massive screen, and surround sound filling the space where my bed used to be. I found my belongings in the garage, stuffed into cardboard boxes that smelled of mildew and dust. My books were warped, photos curling at the edges, clothes ruined from damp air. It was as if every trace of me had been deliberately shoved aside, replaced with something shiny and unnecessary. That night, while I sat quietly in the kitchen trying to gather myself, I overheard voices drifting from the living room. Victoria's tone was low, sharp, and secretive. "The trust fund is the only thing keeping the business afloat," she said. My breath caught as I leaned closer. Logan was with her, his voice casual, almost amused. "So we just keep using it?" he asked. Her reply came quick and firm. "Just until she graduates. By then, the money will be gone, and she'll have no legal standing to prove it." My chest tightened. They weren't just being careless with my inheritance. They were systematically draining it. Everything my father had worked for, everything meant to give me a future, was being funneled into their failing business and their comforts. My blood ran cold. I wanted to burst into the room, demand answers, scream at them for what they were doing. But I stayed hidden in the shadows. Confronting them would do nothing. They held all the power, and I had nothing but the knowledge of their betrayal. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of that musty storage room, knowing the ground beneath me had just shifted. When I returned to school for the fall semester, I tried to push forward. But a letter arrived in the mail, formal and cold. It was from Victoria, written in legal language that barely masked her intentions. According to her, the trust's investments had underperformed. Tuition, she assured me, would still be covered, but every other expense, from housing to food to books, was now mine to handle. Reading those words felt like a punch. Without dorm fees or a meal plan, survival would be impossible. She hadn't just tightened the noose, she had dropped it around my neck. My loans were already stretched thin, my job barely covered the basics, and now the little safety net I thought I had was gone. It was in every way a death sentence for my finances. The notice came taped to my door in a thin white envelope. I had fallen behind on rent, and the landlord didn't bother with sympathy. My loans and small paycheck weren't enough to keep me afloat, and within days I was out. I carried what I could in a few bags, locking the rest in storage I knew I couldn't afford for long. Pride kept me from telling my friends. I couldn't face their pity or their questions. Instead, I convinced myself I would manage on my own, that this would only be temporary. My car became my shelter. At first, I parked in the corners of student lots, but the risk of campus security forced me to move. I learned quickly which grocery store lots stayed quiet through the night, and which neighborhoods had wide, dark streets where no one looked twice. Sleeping there wasn't really sleeping. Every sound jerked me awake, every shadow made my pulse jump. My back ached from curling against the seat, but I told myself it was better than asking for help. With bills piling up, I picked up a second job at a diner. Mornings began with lectures and notes, afternoons were spent rushing to one shift, and evenings disappeared into greasy aprons and clattering plates. By the time the library closed, I'd forced myself to stay until the last announcement echoed through the halls. The silence there was the only place I could think, even if exhaustion blurred the words on the page. When the lights dimmed, I packed my bag and walked to the car, bracing myself for another restless night. The routine hardened into a rhythm. Wake, class, job, study, park, sleep, repeat. My body adapted to constant hunger. My stomach quieted itself after too many meals of leftover fries or scraps the cook let me take home. Showers happened in the gym locker room, where I tried not to linger in case someone noticed how often I came without ever touching the machines. It wasn't just survival, it was the performance of normalcy. I smiled at classmates, handed in assignments on time, and forced energy into my voice when professors called on me. No one saw the shadows under my eyes, or if they did, they assumed it was just the grind of student life. That illusion was my shield. The truth, that I had no bed, no kitchen, no home, stayed locked inside. Each day chipped away at me. My clothes grew looser, my eyes duller, but the anger inside burned sharper. I thought of Victoria often, her manicured hands clutching purses bought with the money I couldn't use to buy dinner. I pictured Logan's laughter behind the wheel of another car I had unknowingly paid for. While they thrived, I fought to disappear into the background, to avoid pity, to avoid being caught. For months stretched on like years. I learned how to be invisible, how to keep my voice steady even when my body shook from fatigue. I existed in the thin space between functioning and collapsing, and no one around me knew. The diner was nearly empty that morning, just a few scattered customers clutching their mugs and waiting for the caffeine to kick in. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of burnt coffee grounds clung to my skin. My uniform hung loose on me, the fabric rubbing against sharp edges of bone where weight had melted away. I moved mechanically, topping off cups, setting down plates, keeping my head down. Then I heard it, a voice from the counter, steady, familiar, and out of place in this tired corner of town. "Just black coffee, please." I turned pitcher in hand and froze. Uncle James sat there, his suit pressed, his presence commanding, looking as though he had stepped out of another world entirely. For a split second, he smiled, as if he expected to see a cheerful niece greeting him. But the smile faltered the moment his eyes really saw me. His expression collapsed into shock, then worry. "Maya," his voice cracked with disbelief. "My God, what's happened to you?" The words sliced through me. Months of silence, of pretending everything was fine, collapsed at once. My throat tightened, and I felt the sting of tears before I could stop them. I tried to answer, but no words came out, only the raw sound of someone who had been holding it all in too long. I turned away, embarrassed, but it was too late. The walls I had built so carefully crumbled. After my shift ended, he was waiting. He didn't leave when I tried to brush him off. Instead, he gestured toward a booth in the corner. "Sit," he said firmly, and something in me obeyed. The diner had quieted down, the clatter of plates gone, leaving only the hum of the neon sign outside. I sat across from him, trembling, and before I could think of how to filter it, everything poured out. The words tumbled over each other. Victoria's control of the trust, the way she starved me of even basic needs, the overheard whispers about my inheritance being siphoned away, the eviction, the months spent in my car. I told him about cold nights curled in the back seat, about the gym showers, about eating leftovers just to keep going. I confessed all of it, the shame, the anger, the exhaustion. Uncle James didn't interrupt. His jaw tightened as he listened, his hand curled into a fist against the table. The usual warmth in his face was replaced by something darker, sharper. I had seen him angry before, but this was different. This was fury, cold and focused. When I finally stopped, my chest aching from the flood of words, he leaned forward. His voice was low, but every syllable carried the weight of command. "This ends today." I shook my head, ready to argue, ready to insist I could handle it, that I didn't need saving. But he didn't leave room for debate. "You're coming home with me." No arguments. The finality in his tone silenced me. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel, relief. The first night in Uncle James's penthouse felt unreal. I kept expecting someone to tap me on the shoulder and tell me I didn't belong. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched out over the Denver skyline, and the lights of the city blinked like stars scattered at my feet. After months of sleeping in parking lots, the silence of that apartment was overwhelming. No car doors slamming nearby, no footsteps circling me, just stillness and the faint hum of the city far below. I hadn't realized how much fear I carried in my chest until it began to ease. Uncle James wasted no time. The morning after he found me, he put me in touch with a lawyer whose reputation preceded her. She was sharp, confident, and intimidating, the kind of person who walked into a room and instantly took command. Sitting across from her, I felt my voice tremble as I recounted every detail. What I'd overheard, the letters Victoria had sent, the obstacles she'd thrown in my path. I laid it all bare, ashamed of some parts, angry about others. She didn't flinch. "We'll move fast," she said simply, flipping through her notes as though my nightmare was already becoming a case she could dismantle. Within days, the paperwork was filed. An emergency motion was pushed into the courts to freeze the trust before any more of it vanished. Victoria had no warning. Meanwhile, Uncle James brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses and a habit of scribbling numbers faster than I could follow. He requested documents, bank records, receipts, anything that touched the trust. For weeks, he sat surrounded by files, tracing every dollar with the precision of a surgeon. I stayed mostly in the background, watching the storm gather around Victoria from the safety of Uncle James's home. Uncle James was firm with me. "Your only job now is school," he told me more than once. "Let us carry the fight." And for the first time in years, I obeyed without guilt. I went to class knowing I had a roof over my head and food waiting when I came back. That security allowed me to breathe again, to sit in a lecture without the weight of hunger gnawing at my stomach or exhaustion pulling me under. The accountant's findings came together piece by piece, each discovery heavier than the last. He uncovered payments labeled as business expenses that turned out to cover Logan's college tuition. He traced withdrawals funneled into a crumbling company that had no hope of survival. He flagged transactions that covered luxury vacations, jewelry, and cars, all pulled straight from the trust under my name. It wasn't carelessness, it was deliberate. The evidence piled higher until the truth was undeniable. Every secret Victoria thought she had buried in paperwork was exposed under the accountant's meticulous eye. Uncle James would glance at the reports, his jaw tightening but his voice steady. "We've got them," he said finally, his tone carrying a certainty that made my chest loosen in relief. For the first time since my father's death, I wasn't waiting to be crushed. I was waiting for justice. The meeting was set in a polished downtown office, the kind with leather chairs and long glass walls that reflected the city skyline. I sat across from Uncle James, his presence steady beside me, while our lawyer arranged thick binders neatly across the conference table. The atmosphere was formal but charged, like everyone could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. Victoria arrived late, her heels clicking against the floor as though each step announced her victory before the meeting even began. She wore a fitted suit and a smug smile, as if this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Her lawyer trailed behind, carrying a slim briefcase, clearly unaware of the avalanche waiting inside those binders. She barely glanced at me before settling into her chair. "Let's make this quick," she said with a dismissive wave, as if she still believed she held the upper hand. Our lawyer began calmly, sliding the first packet of documents across the table. Bank transfers, wire receipts, canceled checks. At first, Victoria smirked, claiming ignorance, insisting the trust had been difficult to manage. But page by page, the evidence grew heavier. Every transaction traced, every withdrawal accounted for, all of it linked to her hand. The paper trail told a story she could not rewrite. Her expression shifted the moment forged documents appeared. Her signature on approvals that shouldn't have existed, her handwriting on false justifications for expenses. "I was saving Daniel's company," she snapped, voice rising. "He would have wanted this." The words hung in the air, sharp and desperate, but they collapsed under the weight of cold facts. No one spoke. Even her own lawyer lowered his gaze, flipping through the papers with tight lips. The silence stretched, broken only when he finally cleared his throat and spoke gently. "Victoria, you should consider settlement." The room seemed to freeze. Settlement meant she knew she was cornered. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Uncle James leaned forward, his tone even but cutting. "No settlement." He glanced at me, then back at her. "You've stolen from Maya. You've stolen from Daniel's legacy. This isn't about compromise, it's about accountability." Our lawyer echoed the sentiment, laying out the choice in stark, uncompromising terms. Victoria could resign as trustee immediately, repay every dollar she had siphoned, with interest, and relinquish her shares of my father's company to me. If she refused, we would pursue criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, charges backed by an ironclad case that would not end in her favor. Victoria's posture deflated as the reality settled in. Her bravado drained away, replaced by a brittle silence. She glanced at her lawyer, searching for a lifeline, but none came. Uncle James didn't soften, didn't shift. His eyes stayed locked on hers, unyielding, until she finally looked down at the documents spread before her. For years, she had twisted control into power, turning my life into something small and desperate. But in that office, surrounded by evidence she couldn't deny, the balance finally tipped. Victoria didn't fight long. The threat of prison stripped away whatever pride she had left. Papers were signed, and just like that, she was no longer the trustee of my father's trust. Uncle James stepped into the role, his steady hand replacing her deceit. The weight that had hung over me for years finally began to lift, but watching her crumble was not the victory she once feared it would be. Her downfall unfolded piece by piece. The first blow was financial. To cover what she had stolen, she was forced to dismantle the very life she had flaunted. Her diamond necklaces and gold bracelets, the symbols she wore like armor, were boxed up and sold off. Even Logan's prized car, which he had paraded around town like a trophy, was taken away. I had once watched him peel out of the driveway in it, laughing with his friends as if he owned the world. Seeing it repossessed was almost poetic. But it wasn't just about the money. The scandal spread quickly, echoing through the social circles she had fought so hard to join. Women she used to gossip with now avoided her calls. Invitations stopped arriving. Even in the grocery store, whispers followed her down the aisles. She had always thrived on appearances, but now her name was linked only to fraud and shame. The criminal case moved forward, though not to its harshest conclusion. With the evidence stacked against her, Victoria accepted a plea deal. Instead of a prison sentence, she received probation and a permanent felony record. It was a softer punishment than I had wanted, but it was enough to ensure she would never wield power again. No board would trust her, no bank would approve her, no employer would ignore her past. The stain was permanent. When the time came for them to leave, they did so quietly, slipping out of Denver without the grand farewells they once demanded. Their large house was sold off to cover debts. The company shares now in my hands, and what remained of their pride crumbled under the reality of starting over with nothing. They moved somewhere far smaller, far humbler, into the kind of life they had always looked down on. I didn't celebrate. There was no moment of triumph, no rush of happiness. Only a quiet stillness, a sense that balance had finally been restored. I had imagined revenge would taste sweet, but instead it felt cold, like standing outside in the wind after a storm. What mattered wasn't her ruin. It was that my father's legacy was no longer poisoned by her greed. The inheritance was secure again, every stolen dollar accounted for and returned. Uncle James placed the company in capable hands, stripping away the reckless management that had once threatened to destroy it. For the first time in years, I could look at my father's name on those company papers without flinching. Victoria's fall didn't heal me, but it cleared the path. She could no longer touch me, no longer control me. And though she disappeared into obscurity, her shadow finally lifted from my life. Once the legal war was behind me, silence settled in, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. Nights were the hardest. I would jolt awake from dreams where I was back in my car, shivering and hiding from shadows, or worse, from dreams where my father was alive only to be taken from me all over again. Even during the day, I carried a constant edge, as though someone might suddenly pull the rug out from under me again. Uncle James noticed. He never pushed, never demanded explanations, but he was always there, nudging me toward the help I didn't want to admit I needed. "Strength isn't about carrying everything alone," he said once over dinner, his voice steady. "It's about knowing when to let someone else hold the weight." With his encouragement, I finally walked into a therapist's office. At first, the words stuck in my throat, but session by session, the dam began to crack. I spoke about the fear, the betrayal, the loneliness, and for the first time, those memories weren't just mine to carry. James became more than an uncle. He filled the role of family that had been stolen from me. In quiet evenings, he would share stories about my dad, little details I had forgotten or never known. How Daniel once worked 3 nights in a row to fix a broken truck for a client, or how he kept a secret stash of chocolate bars for me when I was little. Each memory was like stitching torn fabric back together. Victoria had tried to erase those pieces of him, but James restored them, one story at a time. With stability came practical changes too. I moved into a small but comfortable apartment close to campus. Having my own key, my own bed, my own space, it felt like a luxury I had once thought impossible. I decorated the walls with photos of my parents, bringing their presence back into my everyday life. Slowly, the fear of losing everything again loosened its grip. Academically, I poured myself into my studies. No more late nights worrying where I would sleep or how I'd afford food. That freedom gave me room to excel. When graduation day finally came, I walked across the stage with honors. My name was called, and for a brief moment, I felt my father was there, watching, proud of the daughter who had survived so much. Grieving him was different now. Without Victoria's shadow, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of his absence. Tears came often, but they weren't bitter anymore. They were real, cleansing, the kind that left me lighter afterward. Therapy helped me separate the love I had for him from the anger tied to everything that came after his death. Trust didn't return overnight. I learned to be careful with who I let in, but I also discovered that being cautious didn't mean being closed off. James showed me that love could exist without manipulation, that family could mean safety instead of fear. That was the lesson I carried forward. Protect yourself, but don't build walls so high that kindness can't reach you. The wounds didn't disappear, but healing no longer felt impossible. Piece by piece, I was becoming whole again. Standing in my father's office today, I sometimes catch myself running my hand along the desk he once worked at. It feels surreal. The company that nearly slipped away now thrives under my leadership, stronger and more principled than it ever was. I made a promise to myself when I took over. This business would never again be driven by greed or shortcuts. Every decision is guided by the values my father lived by: hard work, fairness, and integrity. It hasn't been easy, but building something sustainable and ethical has given me a sense of pride that money alone could never bring. Uncle James remains my anchor in all of this. His wisdom and guidance have shaped me into the leader I am becoming. He doesn't shield me from challenges. Instead, he pushes me to face them head-on, reminding me that resilience is a muscle built through use. Our relationship is more than mentorship. It's a friendship grounded in loyalty and mutual respect. In him, I found the steady hand I had longed for, and knowing he is there gives me the confidence to keep moving forward. What I endured could have left me bitter, but instead, it left me determined to ensure others would not have to fight the same silent battles I did. That's why I created a scholarship for students experiencing housing insecurity. I know the exhaustion of pretending everything is fine when you're hungry, or the humiliation of hiding the truth about where you sleep at night. With this scholarship, I want to offer not just financial relief but dignity, a reminder that their dreams are worth fighting for. Seeing the first recipients walk into their dorms with keys of their own has been one of the proudest moments of my life. I often think about how quickly life can turn. One moment, you feel trapped in despair, convinced that tomorrow will be no different from today. And then, unexpectedly, someone steps in, or circumstances shift, and a door opens where you thought there was only a wall. My uncle's intervention was that moment for me, but it taught me something larger. Hope can be delayed, but it is never gone. To anyone listening now, in whatever corner of the world you find yourself, I want you to hold on to that truth. Pain can feel permanent, but it isn't. Your present situation does not define the rest of your story. Help can come from where you least expect it, and strength can rise in you long after you think you've run out. If this journey speaks to you, I'd love to hear your story too. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. I promise your words matter. And if you know someone who needs to hear that tomorrow can be brighter, please pass this along. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because sometimes a single story can remind someone else that the night really is darkest just before the dawn. Thank you for walking with me through mine.